Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Lukes here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to be here again, Arnie.
No worries. Pleased to have you, Robert. And Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi there, Andy. Well, I'm out here in the west. Bob is in the east. I don't know how he's doing, but I'm just sweltering in this dreadful warming climate. It's
Is that right?
it's really quite cool out here. You have to wear a jacket.
Hmm. How are you going, Bob? What's the weather like there on the east side?
Oh, it's around 27 degrees, but it's humid in this area. So
Hmm.
you get an effect of going up to 30, 31, 32, which is
Mm-hmm.
plenty warm for me. I'm from
Okay.
Alberta, where the climate is cooler and drier.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So you're not used to the sultry tropical conditions of the
No,
eastern side of
after
Canada.
after 49 years, I still haven't become accustomed to this climate over here.
Good on you. Good on you.
Mhm.
Well, I'm actually on the move again today. I'm still on the road, and where I am, overnight it got down to possibly -2, I think.
Wow.
So we're in a warm home. The heater's going, and it's all comfortable. But you go outside, and you're thinking, well, okay, am I adapting to this weather? And of course I am. I'll put a jumper on. I'll put a singlet on or something like that. And then maybe even if it gets really cold and if it's blowy, I'll put a hat on to stop the heat transfer from the top of the head. So
Mhm.
to me, it's all about adaptation, and I think that's one thing that we as people, as human beings, can do. Animals just have their coat and they have to just live with it, whereas we can put more on, take more off, and accommodate to the weather. Okay, the subject for today: the Chinese state banking versus the free market. That's the actual title that's in the heading. And what caused me to actually consider this topic was an article written by Ellen Brown, and I'm going to go to her website. My audio will continue. So this is Ellen Brown's website, Web of Debt, and her blog. And this particular article that's there, it's called Neoliberalism Has Met Its Match in China. And I found it an interesting article because in it, Ellen is actually referencing other writers and other observers of what's actually transpiring with the control of banking firmly in the hands of if you like, the technocracy or the bureaucracy, the control of banking. And in the article, she's illustrating that if there are industries or new projects, they want to release the credit. The credit is released. The projects are committed to, they're executed, and if in the course of the execution of that project and the returns aren't what they expect, and so it's essentially unviable and falls into bankruptcy, that in itself isn't the end of the world, but rather that those debts can be written off and then the state continues on its way to, if you like, capitalise, industrialise this nation. So there's no stopping the development of China. And I think that's enough from the article. And I'd like to open the floor up. So, Robert, your thoughts, please.
Well, I have a son who has lived in China for about 16 years, and I have made a number of trips there over that period. And I recommend that, or I really would like it if everybody from the Western world visited China just to see what's accomplished there. Because as far as I can see, they follow the principle enunciated in social credit that what is physically possible and desirable should be made financially possible. And they just don't seem to have any uh, concept of physical limitation
Hmm.
in their development. They seem to exaggerate the rapidity of development sometimes, but it has a tremendous throw-off benefit for the population because there's a lot of development going on all the time, and that creates, I think, decent paying jobs for many people. The population has been lifted out of poverty to a tremendous extent. There is still poverty in China, but the benefits of this development have not accrued just to a few individuals. They've accrued to the society as a whole, and they have concentrated in providing infrastructure that allows further development.
Hmm.
Now it's centrally directed, although it couldn't be entirely centrally directed. It's just too big a project, I think. So they must be delegating a lot of authority to local officials. But you can certainly see the results of having somebody in a position to make a decision about what will be done and issuing or obtaining the financial means of seeing it done. Because there's just no hesitation about doing anything in China, and there seems to be no limit to their imagination either. You know, they talk about building railroads from Russia to North America through the Bering Strait and all sorts of projects like this. And with China, although it sounds practically insane, you can almost imagining them tackling it and pulling it off.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible to think of the such a rapid development as in the pursuit of, if you like, their national goals, and whether you're in agreement with those goals or not. I think that it's most fascinating to look at it, what can be physically done when it's made financially possible. Wallace Klinck.
Well, that's right. And of course, it's very complex because we have the Chinese are a very, very ancient civilization, and they have their own culture. We have a culture which is very different, and in the West, and I think to a large extent we are overly influenced by Old Testament rigidity or concept of, you might even say a concept of guilt. We're, condemned to work by the sweat of our brow for the rest of our days, which is not a terribly attractive alternative, really. And I think that we are held back by things. As Arnie and I were talking before we got on, we seem to be restrained by money in a way that is almost idolatrous. Money has we don't seem to think about, are the men and the materials and the resources there to do something? We think, do we have sufficient money to do it? And when you think that money is just simply accountancy, that's all it is. It's just accountancy. It seems a bit, well, psychotic, frankly, to think that you would actually govern or restrict or restrain your physical achievements by a system of accountancy, of evaluation.
Yeah, that to me is, I mean, historically, the 1929 depression, when the whole world was driven into depression by essentially a central bank policy of withdrawing credit, of withdrawing new loans for existing businesses. And so, of course, the previous loans had to be repaid, and there was no new credits to cover it, and it forced them into insolvency. And so everything spiraled down to the point of where industry was throwing things away.
And I
It
believe
was
one of the governors of that bank made the comment that he didn't believe it after causing a credit contraction that caused absolute misery for millions of people. He said he didn't believe it was good for people to be too prosperous. Now that's what an arrogant.
what a hideous attitude to have for your fellow human being, because it really is. If you place the Puritan
Yes.
ethic is that as you are, you think that someone else needs to be doing something other than what they're doing. It's okay for you to choose to do what you want to do, but someone else has to do something else. And that is so wrong. And the Christian perspective is that you would only do to him what you would want him to do to you. Now, it is entirely different perspective, one between the Puritanism, if you like, and to me the outworking of Puritanism is you can see it equally in the capitalist system as you can in the communist system, that other people must be controlled, and in the capitalist system it's done financially, and as you said, Wally, with that central banker saying it's not good for people to have too much or to enjoy, and the other, of course, is if you like, the confiscation, and this is deliberate confiscation of the inheritance, the cultural inheritance. I looked the other day, we're looking at a combustion heater, a heater that you put wood in. And I'm thinking, look at the cultural inheritance in that. And you say, well, explain it. And I said, well, not that long ago, an open fire was considered a reasonable form of heating. And now you've got a combustion heater which might have a triple burn arrangement where it actually preheats the air across the front of the glass so that you can warm the air before it actually ignites the fuel. You burn it across a catalyst so that even the after fuel is burnt. And then, of course, the box has got an insulation shell around it so that you've got a fan that circulates air past the box so that it transfers the box heat further. And then, of course, the chimney that goes up through a triple insulated compartment in the ceiling. The chimney, again, transferring heat. All of these things to do with that heater about, to me, is the cultural inheritance, about efficiency, about design improvements, about aesthetically enjoying an open fire without actually having the dustiness that comes from actually having an open fire. And who does that belong to? It belongs to everyone. And yet we, with technology, with advanced control, automation, robotics, our cultural inheritance is being denied us through the financial system. Robert.
Yes, I think the Chinese have benefited from our cultural inheritance more than we're doing at present, because they invited all sorts of uh, foreign enterprises in to develop things in China, and then they picked up on it, learned it, and now they're emulating it. And they've had many foreign engineering, architectural firms build these fantastic structures, the buildings, glass edifices, 120 or more stories in the air. And this is something that they've learned how to do from the Western world. Because in fact, China was a pretty stagnant nation for a long time. They seem to reach a fairly impressive level of technology, and then they just stayed there. But like Japan was that way too before the Europeans showed up on the scene. But the Japanese recognized that the Europeans had advantageous ways of doing things, and they went for them in a big way. And then Japan became as technologically advanced as the Western world in pretty short order. And so we've contributed much to the Chinese, but they've had the intelligence to make use of it, whereas we seem to be this stagnant region of the world now, with our infrastructure deteriorating and sort of inability to upgrade things. And I mean, in China, they have about 20,000 kilometers or miles of high-speed rail. I mean, this is really high speed, like 350 kilometers an hour. It's like an airplane practically. And it goes in a straight line for hundreds and hundreds of miles. If there's a mountain, there is a tunnel straight through the mountain. If there's a valley, there's a bridge over the valley. So this thing never has to turn. And that's how it's able to go at these fantastic speeds. But I don't think we can even conceive of such a thing over here. They've been talking about doing that between Los Angeles and San Francisco for about 20 years. But for some reason, they can't get it off the ground. What is wrong? What is wrong? What is the bottleneck,
Yeah.
It's our money, and also the fact that we have been sort of brainwashed into an excessive preoccupation with, I guess, environmental concerns. But I think that has just been used as an excuse to hamper our technological development.
I agree with you completely on that one, Bob, for sure, because the West itself has been the innovator, the creator of so many marvelous inventions. I mean, going back to the Industrial Revolution, which its birthplace, if you like, was in the industrial areas around London, and it's taken new technology out. I mean, the development of India, things like that, most of it was through the industries in Britain. And whereas nowadays, the harvesting of that technology and of course the stifling of the technology in the West is done as a consequence of banking policy. It's deliberate. Its political will is deliberate, exercised through the privately owned banking institutions. Wallace.
Well, it's true also that international finance has moved from one culture to another and caused development in different regions of the world. And they have the power to actually, to generate very active economic activity and to suppress it in another area. They've been able to
Mm-hmm.
do that because money is credit, and credit is the all motivating or the motivative force behind all action.
Mm-hmm.
Credit meaning belief, the ability to deliver. I mean, my credit is as good as my word. My credit is my ability to deliver according to my promise. Promise
Mm-hmm.
to pay, promise to pay, And so it's, now you wonder about the Chinese people. I've talked to a number of them, and I almost have the impression that they don't have some kind of a psychological or philosophical impediment that stops them from just going ahead and doing things. I think that we have some kind of there is an element of guilt in our culture. And guilt is a thing that is, it, it causes things to become static, because if you feel guilt, you are not really free to move ahead in the
Mm-hmm.
way that you are. If you just see the world and you see the possibilities, and you're not impeded by any kind of a philosophical or ideological or religious restraint, except the desire to do what is possible, you're probably going to do a lot more than if you have all of these other, what do you call them, things hanging on you. These,
Mm.
and I think that there's an element of that. But on the other hand, the power of finance is great, and they've certainly sown the seeds in China, and those seeds have definitely flowered, and the Chinese are doing a great deal with it now. It's really quite amazing to see. But the only
Mm.
the only question is the question of policy. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
with regard to the governor of the Bank of England who made that statement, he
Mm-hmm.
also went on to say, if you can believe it, the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. Well,
Oh
that
yeah,
would
that's
seem
right.
to me to indicate that there's some kind of a motive force, a plan. There's something there that is going
Mm-hmm.
on,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what anybody cares or thinks.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
No, I agree with you, Wally. That observation's most important. I was thinking of the uh, something I read a while back. It was to do with the fighter planes that Russia was selling to China,
oh,
and China had to declare that they would not reverse engineer the engines. They would not reverse engineer the engines because, of course, copyright means nothing to the Chinese, and the Russians, being realistic, know that their technology is quite sophisticated and quite advanced. And if we're going to sell you these particular things, you must not reverse engineer it, so that technology sort of is undone. The step forward, the one step up that perhaps the Soviets have over I call them Soviets, which is probably the correct description because the administration is still a totalitarian administration. It hasn't changed. But yeah, getting back to the trades that go on, and I know that if you look up Anthony Sutton, American professor, military aid to the Soviet Union, military aid um, to different nations as a consequence of what was going on. Even in wartime, the latest technology was being shipped across to so that it could be reverse engineered, and that was from the west to the east. And Anthony Sutton. So it's not a new phenomena. This situation where the technology coming from the west to the east. I mean, a lot of these students, engineers coming through our universities, they're being trained to the highest levels. And then, of
hmm.
course, they work their way into the industry within a nation, and then the technology is available to take back. the technology, the methods, the systems, the the thinking
Yes,
to take it back to the host country.
you see,
Wally, you want to keep
well,
going?
yeah, I
Yeah.
just would like to say, I've been thinking about this lately, and I think, we have a system of ownership. We know that you can only use resources effectively if you have independent control of them. If someone else is always dictating what you can do with them, it kills initiative and it stultifies their growth.
Hmm.
And so that there's no doubt that private ownership is really important. And I'm talking here about private ownership of the means of production.
Hmm.
Um, but if you just take money completely away from the whole scene and think of us as being organisms living upon this globe and doing our thing, where does the concept of ownership then come in? Ownership seems to be associated with money. And it seems to me that what Douglas did, an absolute genius or accidental genius, whatever it was, they said he was dreaming about these streams of coupons that were coming from these tabulating machines when he discovered the flaw in the price system, the deficiency of
Hmm.
purchasing power. We have seemed to discover the secret of successful functioning, but we have not discovered apparently the method of getting the results of that functioning to the public, to its right destination. And we know
Hmm.
that we can, producers today owners or producers can produce infinitely more than they could even think of consuming themselves. So it makes absolutely no sense to sit there and produce things in a great mountain just to have a mountain of unused, unclaimed goods. So that
Hmm.
it is just logically, it's irrational to suppose that those goods are not meant to go to a destination other than just your own plant as inventory. So, I mean, it seems to me that what Douglas did, he recognized the right of ownership of the people to the results that flow from industry due to non-labor factors, which I think is just an amazing thing, actually.
Hmm.
It's he understood. He understood. I mean, God owns the earth. We all are organisms on the earth, and we have a right to life. Any organism has a right to draw sustenance from its environment, except human beings.
Hmm.
As we were talking about the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Well, I never say it that way. I say, dear God, please give me a job so I can get the money to buy my daily bread.
Hmm.
No, I don't. I mean, I would never think of it. It sounds mad.
You're being
Yeah.
ironic now, Wall. I hope
I'm
everybody's
being
getting
ironic. Yeah, I'm being
that. You've
absolutely
been
ironic.
ironic a few times in this little
Yeah, I know you can lose people
diatribe.
if you,
Yeah,
especially if people are not accustomed to your particular mode of thinking. You can be
yeah.
ironic and you can lose them, which is not
Hmm.
good. And I thank you for breaking in there.
No worries. No, I appreciate your comments, Wally. The our whole perspective is if God owns the world, which He does because He created it,
That's right.
and He allows us to be stewards over our part of ship, and there is this material abundance that's flowing, and who actually does own that? Who can claim that all this material abundance, is mine, 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 and no one else's? It's a form of insanity, because the material abundance needs to be there in a fashion that all can enjoy as they're able. Robert.
Well, I was wondering when you said that the Russians made the Chinese promise that they wouldn't back engineer the engines. Why would they believe a promise made by the Chinese to that effect? I mean,
I
once they
know,
got the
I know,
thing, they're going to take a
I know.
close look at it, I'm sure.
I'm sure they will too. Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
they've done that with a lot of things. But if you look at history, we go through these phases of fantastic expansion and then everything clamps down. It's just so strange. We
Hmm.
had uh, uh, depression, I think, in the United States around 1907, even though a lot of American critics of the financial system say everything bad started with the Federal Reserve System. Well, it didn't. They had cyclical slowdowns and depressions and recessions right through the 18th and 19th centuries. So that is a false perspective they've got. Not that the Federal Reserve doesn't deserve a lot of criticism, but they had the First World War, and what happened? All the limits on productivity were eliminated, and production became just incredible. You look at photographs from that time, and women working in factories producing shells for cannons and so on. And as far as the eye can see, it's unbelievable what was done in that war. And then after the war, there was a boom in the United States. They had the Roaring '20s. They had fantastic technological development. They built New York. All those sky rises built by the Mohawk Indians from Canada, because they're the only ones who could stand the heights. And then they had all of a sudden, there was no more capacity for production. We had the Great Depression. Well, what happened? It's very strange. It's just a financial phenomenon. It's financial control. And then, lo and behold, they got the Second World War going, and the restraints came off again, and building all kinds of armaments, and even sending shiploads and shiploads of them to the Soviet Union in preparation for their resistance to the German invasion. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, I think tens of thousands of airplanes were shipped over there. And now I think the Russians did get going, and they built their own models of tanks and that sort of thing. But what happened that all of a sudden this physical productivity became possible when it wasn't during the Great Depression? You got to wonder, how can people rationalize this in their minds? And now we have the same thing. I mean, we had the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany, and for all their political faults, they certainly did a lot of economic development in those countries. And now we have the same phenomenon going on in China. The financial restraints are off, but they don't seem to be off us for some reason. They're still holding us back and preventing us from enjoying our natural resources. We can't make use of them as I mean, nothing logically prevents us from doing it, but the finance won't allow it.
Yeah, that's right. As policy, and to me, that's the most important point that I'm getting out of this whole discussion is policy. What is actually going on in China is that China's got this huge material expansion, and their infrastructure and capital, their real wealth, is going through the roof. And as policy, the West is being wound down. As policy, it's saying, oh, the end of the world is coming because of climate change. Well, I noticed, Bob, that you're in a short sleeve shirt. It looks like it, and I'm in a jumper and a t-shirt. And this is climate. This is the real world, and we all adapt to it. And 1/100th of 1 degree, can we even measure it accurately? As a human being, you can't. But of course, the scientists are saying this is catastrophic, which it's not. So as policy, we're being wound down. We're being deindustrialized, the Lima Declaration, things like that, as policy, and handing over our industry to third world nations. And in this case, it's to the point where, okay, if there's any sort of hiccup, China has this huge workforce that's just got to be kept employed. And no matter what, they just have to continue to be working. Otherwise, they'll have idle time to actually think about what's actually going on. Wallace.
Well, that really brings back my experience when I was in China about 3 years ago, and meeting this young man on the street, and he has an American T-shirt on, and it says "Work less, play more." So I think the Chinese may have a little bit of some kind of a worm going on there in their society that might be working in another direction too, and not just the work state. But I don't think that they are bound to the concept of the work state like the in the ideological way that the Soviet Union was. I mean, that was just work, and in fascist countries too, like in Germany, work will make you free. Well, you have to ask the question: how much work before you're going to be free? If you can only be free by working,
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's kind of chasing your tail, isn't it? There's no end to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm,
And
mm,
so, I mean, it's a question of metaphysics, philosophy, and I do think that we are witnessing a very, very concentrated attack on Christian society. But Christian
mm,
society has not been Christian society. Christian society has been penetrated by Puritanism, and it has
mm,
led it to into some very sordid activities, like two world
mm,
wars, destroying
mm,
the results, you know, destroying the culture of a continent twice
mm,
in one century, and we're
mm,
cousins. I mean,
mm,
do relatives naturally engage in that type of destructive relationship? I don't
mm.
think so. There's got to be
Good point.
something beyond it. And of course, the statements of people like the director of the Bank of England are pretty indicative that there is a policy that is above the ordinary people, and it's being imposed upon society
Mm,
as a whole.
mm,
It's really a tragedy, because I think that if people had understood better the nature of the Christian message and been able to apply it in an organic sense to our daily affairs, I think that we would have had something near the kingdom of heaven on earth. I can speak metaphorically, maybe, but if all that energy and effort that went into those two wars had been devoted solely to the betterment of mankind, can you imagine what
yeah,
the world would be like?
yeah, exactly right. All of those jeeps and tanks could have been plows and tractors and drilling rigs to get water to parched parts of the earth. I mean, there's so much abundance that could have been there, and it was just futilely just destroyed, just put into great mounds and piles and destroyed, and it's such a tragedy, a
So,
missed opportunity. Yeah,
well, don't you think then it's justifiable to ask who benefits?
who benefits? That's right. Yeah, in the end, of course, it's about power.
Yeah.
We're at the 32-minute mark by the look of it. So I'm going to just ask you for closing comments. It's certainly a very good discussion about this Ellen Brown's article. We've got to thank Ellen for writing it and just for prompting our thinking. Robert Klinck, your closing comments, please.
Well, China has been through massive dislocations in the last, say, 70 years with the communist revolution, and the cultural revolution, and the society was just eviscerated. It was an ancient culture with, ways of doing things and philosophical
Hmm.
approaches and so on. Some stultifying and some very admirable. I've met some very sophisticated, or one very sophisticated Chinese person, an old man, and he struck me as being so deep. It was a revelation to me. But anyway, they went through all that, and then they went through this tremendous boom, which has seen the old areas of the cities where the Chinese lived so long, what they call the Hutong, just ripped up, torn up, people thrown out of their homes, and then all modern apartment complexes going up. It was a preparation maybe for this tremendous the boom they're going through now, because they've lost some of the restraints they had because of their their traditions and so on.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it is certainly a remarkable thing, and I don't know what caused the development there to be unleashed, but it is, as Wally said, as though the financial power moves across from area to area on the earth and releases some particular place to accomplish miracles, economic miracles, but they're chosen by the financial power. And I'm not sure that all this development is really being inspired internally in China. I would think it might be being permitted by international financial institutions, and that the Chinese are ultimately under their control too.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I would expect. Closing comments, please, Wallace.
Well, I do think that the crux of the matter is we're discussing here the Chinese phenomenon and the American reaction to it, which has been very protective and which historically has been a source of international friction and war, because every nation is trying to export more than it imports in order to make up for what social credit has identified as being a fundamental structural deficiency of consumer buying power in each economy. And until we can somehow or another get over this Puritan idea that everyone must work for every simple thing that they get and learn to distribute the product of our industry internally so that we don't depend on external markets to capture credits so that we can survive financially internally, this situation can only become more and more critical. It can be more and more tense and more dangerous. And yet, you know, I think it is just simply a matter of recognizing that every living human being has an inheritance, and they're entitled to the inheritance, and we should make sure that they get their inheritance without having to go out and try to secure economic stability or economic viability by dropping or forcing our goods on other people and ultimately dropping bombs on them in order to bolster our exports.
Yeah.
I think we have to learn. If we can't learn, this is something of the heart, the soul, and the spirit. I think we have to come to a realization that everyone has a right, by the very nature of things, to draw on their environment for their sustenance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. It's a love of life that I can hear in what you've just said there, Wally. That's to me, it's beautifully put. That the youngest, smallest, oldest, most decrepit are all human beings, and every single one of them has a soul, and that soul is eternal. That soul is eternal. States come and states go. Industries come and industries go, but it's only the soul that is eternal and who sups with God Himself. And to me, beautifully put, that there's no reason why we can't all have a secure material abundance around us. And if there are nations that are suffering and struggling, we'll assist them in providing their own. But we don't need to actually go into them and essentially be the pirates that confiscate all of their natural wealth in order for us to balance the books. I agree. I agree. Beautifully put. Thank you, gentlemen, for today. An interesting forum, and thank you, Ellen Brown, for writing that article that caused a little bit more thinking. This is Arnie Lukes at the Freedom Forum. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.